Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're tackling a pretty big one, innovation. Where do these brilliant ideas come from? How do they spread and why do some of them just never seem to catch fire?
Yeah, that's a great question. And luckily for us, we've got a great guide in Stephen Johnson's Where Good Ideas Come From to help us answer those questions.
Plus, we're going to be taking a close look at a real head scratcher, the 9/11 Phoenix memo,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
and what it teaches us about how organizations can either, help those crucial sparks of innovation along or just totally miss them.
What I think is so fascinating about this deep dive is how we're going to be jumping between scales, like from tiny carbon atoms to bustling cities to the intricate workings of the human mind.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride. So let's start with something I think we all learned in school, carbon.
Okay.
Why is carbon so important, and what does it even have to do with innovation?
Well, just like carbon needs those four bonds to create, complex molecules in life. Great ideas often need multiple connections to truly flourish. Think of carbon as like a master networker, always forming those bonds. It's these connections that allow it to build complex structures like DNA
Okay.
and proteins and all the building blocks of life. Similarly, innovation thrives on connection.
That's actually a really great analogy, carbon, the ultimate networker.
There you go.
So this kind of brings us to liquid networks, right?
Right?
Those environments where ideas can just flow freely and bump into each other. Tell me more about those.
Yeah, absolutely. So imagine a bustling city full of people from all sorts of different backgrounds. They're sharing ideas, they're sharing knowledge. That's a liquid network in action. And one of the earliest examples of this is, well, the first cities themselves.
Wait, so you're saying that cities were like the original innovation hubs? I never thought about it that way.
Think about it. After the agricultural revolution, people started clustering together, right? Exchanging ideas, exchanging goods, trading. This density, this constant interaction, it sparked a surge in innovation.
So it's like a giant brainstorming session, except it's just kind of happening all the time organically.
Precisely. And it wasn't just about sharing completed ideas. Sometimes it was just a snippet of a conversation or a half-formed thought that could spark a whole new chain of innovation. It's what we call information spillover. Good ideas just, they can't be contained.
It's like that game of telephone we used to play as kids.
Yeah,
But instead of getting all jumbled up, the ideas actually get better with each retelling.
exactly. Take the example of double-entry bookkeeping. It emerged in those vibrant Italian city-states and quickly spread throughout Europe and completely revolutionized commerce.
Wow.
And no one owned that idea. It was just too valuable to be kept under wraps.
That's amazing. Okay, but not all great ideas come from those bustling city centers, right?
Yeah.
What about those aha moments we have? Those sudden bursts of inspiration. How do those fit into the picture?
That's where things get really interesting. Those aha moments are often the culmination of something called slow hunches.
Slow hunches.
They're not those sudden bursts of insight that we often imagine. They're more like seeds planted in our minds that slowly gather connections over time.
So it's not about having one brilliant idea, but about nurturing a bunch of these slow hunches, letting them simmer in our subconscious.
Precisely. It's about creating the right conditions for those hunches to connect, to combine, and to form something new. And sometimes it takes years for those connections to form.
Which brings us to the 9/11 Phoenix memo, right? A classic example of a slow hunch that unfortunately never really got the chance to fully develop.
Yeah, the Phoenix memo is a perfect, albeit tragic, illustration of this concept. In 2001, FBI agent Ken Williams noticed a pattern. Individuals with ties to radical Islam were enrolling in flight schools. It was a hunch, a slow hunch, that something was brewing.
Right, and he put it all down in a memo, this warning about a potential plot. And here's where it gets really frustrating. That memo basically just got lost in the FBI's bureaucratic system,
Right.
never connected with other vital information.
And that's the danger of these isolated hunches, right?
Yeah.
They need to collide with other ideas, other perspectives to really reach their full potential.
It makes you wonder, what if the FBI had been more like one of those bustling cities? Or even like a modern-day internet forum where information flows more freely?
That's one of the big questions we'll be exploring today. How can organizations create those liquid networks where innovation can truly thrive? But for now, let's switch gears and talk about something a bit more whimsical. Let's talk about serendipity.
Serendipity. Now that's a word I like. Sounds a lot more fun than bureaucracy. But how does serendipity actually play a role in innovation? Is it just pure luck?
Well, it's not just luck. Think of it this way. Serendipity is like stumbling across a hidden treasure, but you have to be looking for it. You have to be open to those unexpected discoveries.
So it's about being in the right place at the right time, but also having the right mindset.
Exactly. It's about having that prepared mind, that ability to see the connections that others might miss.
Mm.
Think about dreams, for example. They can be a real breeding ground for serendipitous insights.
Whoa, hold on. Dreams.
Yeah.
You mean those weird random thoughts we have while we're sleeping?
Think about it. Those dreams are our minds making random connections, exploring all sorts of wild possibilities. Stephen Johnson calls these periods of mental disorganization chaos modes,
Okay.
and they can lead to some pretty amazing breakthroughs.
Okay, now that's mind-blowing. So you're telling me that instead of trying to control our thoughts, we should embrace a little bit of chaos, just let our minds wander and see what happens.
Exactly. It's like shaking up a snow globe, right?
Okay.
Sometimes you need a little chaos to see those new patterns emerge.
I like that. But those are just kind of random examples, right? How can we like intentionally cultivate serendipity in our own lives? It's not like we can just schedule it on our calendars.
You're right. You can't really schedule serendipity, but you can create environments where it's more likely to occur. And that's what we'll be exploring next.
Yeah.
Practical ways to boost your own personal serendipity. You know, it's funny you should mention scheduling serendipity,
Yeah.
because one of the best ways to cultivate it is to actually step away from the calendar, from the to-do list, and just let your mind wander a bit.
So are you suggesting we all quit our jobs and become like nomadic philosophers wandering the countryside in search of inspiration? Because that sounds kind of tempting, actually.
Well, maybe not that drastic, but there's definitely something to be said for taking breaks,
Hmm.
you know, stepping outside of our routines and allowing ourselves to be open to those unexpected encounters.
Like those famous eureka moments in the bathtub.
Exactly.
Or those ideas that hit us while we're out for a walk. I've definitely had some of my best brainstorming sessions while walking my dog.
Exactly. Walking, especially in nature, can be incredibly helpful for freeing up the mind. It allows those subconscious connections to bubble up to the surface. And speaking of things that bubble up, let's talk about another powerful tool for cultivating serendipity: deep dive reading.
Deep dive reading. So not just like skimming headlines or scrolling through social media.
Exactly. Think of it as creating your own personal liquid network of ideas.
Okay.
By immersing yourself in a book or an article or even a collection of research papers, you're exposing yourself to this concentrated network of thoughts and perspectives.
It's like building your own mental city full of fascinating characters, intriguing conversations.
I love that analogy. And just like in a real city, those chance encounters, those unexpected connections, they can lead to some pretty amazing breakthroughs.
So instead of just passively consuming information, we should be actively engaging with it, making notes, asking questions, and really looking for those unexpected connections.
Precisely. It's about creating a dialogue with the ideas you're encountering, allowing them to challenge your assumptions and to spark new insights.
And this brings us to another tool that can help us with those deep dives. Devin Think, right? Tell me more about how technology can actually help us cultivate serendipity.
Yeah, Devin thinks is a great example of how technology can help us manage that overwhelming flow of information and make those serendipitous connections. It's like having a digital commonplace book on steroids. You can store all sorts of information in it: notes, quotes, articles, even entire books, and then use its powerful search and linking capabilities to discover unexpected relationships between those ideas.
So it's like having a personal research assistant who can connect the dots for you. Sign me up.
It's definitely a game changer for anyone who wants to take their deep dives to the next level.
Okay.
But even without specialized software, there are plenty of ways to use technology to boost your serendipity.
Hmm.
Think about setting up Google alerts for keywords related to your interests, or using social media to connect with people who are working on similar projects. The key is to be intentional about curating your own information network.
So it's about being proactive rather than just letting the algorithms decide what we see.
I like that. But let's shift gears for a moment and go back to the human element of all this. We've talked about systems and tools, but what about the people who are actually making those decisions? How do our own biases and assumptions affect our ability to recognize and nurture those innovative sparks?
That's a crucial point. Even with the best systems in place, we're still human. And humans are prone to all sorts of cognitive biases. One of the biggest challenges we face is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs while ignoring evidence that contradicts them.
Oh, I am definitely guilty of that. It's so easy to get stuck in our own echo chambers, surrounded by people who agree with us.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to actively seek out diverse perspectives, to expose ourselves to ideas that challenge our assumptions. Remember, innovation often comes from those unexpected collisions, those moments when different ways of thinking come together.
So we need to be more open-minded, more willing to question our own beliefs and to consider alternative viewpoints.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this ties into another important concept, the willingness to embrace uncertainty.
Okay.
Innovation is inherently uncertain. We're venturing into the unknown, exploring new possibilities, and that can be scary.
I think that's why so many people resist change. It's comfortable to stick with what we know, even if it's not working as well as it could be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if we want to truly innovate, we need to get comfortable with that discomfort. We need to embrace the idea that we don't have all the answers and be willing to experiment, to try new things, even if we're not sure they'll work.
It's about having that growth mindset, that belief that we can learn and evolve.
Precisely. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of innovation, the willingness to embrace failure. Now, I know what you're thinking, failure. Isn't that something we should avoid at all costs?
Yeah. My inner perfectionist is cringing a little bit at the thought of failure, but I have a feeling you're going to tell me that it's not always a bad thing.
You're right. In fact, failure can be an incredibly powerful engine for innovation. Think about it. If we're always afraid to make mistakes, we'll never venture outside of our comfort zones. We'll never explore those uncharted territories where those truly groundbreaking ideas reside.
So you're saying we should actually encourage failure, celebrate our mistakes.
Not exactly celebrate, but definitely reframe how we think about them.
Okay.
Failure is simply feedback. It's an opportunity to learn, to adjust our course, and to try again. The key is to create a culture where failure is seen as a necessary part of the process, not a personal shortcoming.
Okay, so it's not about being reckless or careless, but about being thoughtful and intentional about how we approach those inevitable setbacks.
Exactly. It's about creating a safe space where people feel comfortable experimenting, taking risks, and even failing because they know they won't be punished for it.
And that brings us back to the 9/11 Phoenix memo, right? If the FBI had had a more open and collaborative culture where agents felt comfortable sharing their hunches and even their mistakes, perhaps that crucial information wouldn't have been overlooked.
It's a sobering thought, but it's also a powerful reminder that innovation isn't just about individual brilliance. It's about creating systems and cultures that allow that brilliance to flourish.
Systems that encourage open communication, that foster serendipity, and that embrace failure as an opportunity for growth.
Precisely. And that brings us to another key element of innovation. Platforms, now, when we hear the word platform, we often think of technology like social media platforms or online marketplaces. But the concept of platforms is much broader than that.
So what exactly do we mean by platforms in the context of innovation?
A platform is essentially a foundation upon which new ideas and creations can be built. Think about the alphabet, for example. It's a platform for language. It allows us to combine letters in countless ways to create words and sentences and entire stories.
Okay, so it's a kind of infrastructure for innovation, a set of building blocks that we can use to create something new.
Exactly. And platforms can be physical, like the printing press or the internet, or they can be conceptual, like the scientific method or the legal system.
So these platforms, they kind of provide the framework, the rules of the game, so to speak, allowing for innovation to occur within those boundaries.
Precisely. And the most successful platforms are those that are both stable and flexible, providing a solid foundation while also allowing for adaptation and evolution.
That makes sense. It's like a playground. You need a safe and structured environment, but you also want the freedom to explore and experiment.
That's a great analogy. And just like playgrounds, platforms need to be accessible, welcoming to a diversity of participants. The more minds they can interact and contribute, the more vibrant and innovative the platform becomes.
Okay, so we've got these platforms, these fertile grounds for innovation, but how do we ensure that those good ideas actually take root and flourish? How do we go from a spark of inspiration to a tangible creation?
That's where the concept of exaptation comes in. It's a term borrowed from evolutionary biology, and it refers to the process of adapting an existing feature for a new purpose.
So it's like repurposing something, taking something that already exists and finding a new and unexpected use for it.
Exactly, and this happens all the time in nature. Think about feathers, for example. They originally evolved for insulation, but they were later adapted for flight.
Wait, so birds weren't always meant to fly? Their feathers were basically like built-in winter coats.
That's the prevailing theory, and it's a great example of how evolution is often a tinkerer, not an engineer. It works with what's available, adapting existing features for new and unexpected purposes.
That's fascinating. So how does this concept of exaptation apply to human innovation?
Well, think about the wheel. It was originally used for pottery, but it was later adapted for transportation. Or the internet, which was initially developed for military and academic communication, but was later adapted for countless other purposes.
So we're constantly repurposing ideas and technologies, building upon what came before. It's like standing on the shoulders of giants, but instead of just seeing farther, we're creating something entirely new.
That's a great way to put it, and this process of exaptation is essential to innovation because it allows us to leverage existing knowledge and resources rather than starting from scratch every time.
It's like having this giant toolbox filled with all sorts of interesting gadgets and gizmos.
Hmm.
We just need to figure out how to combine them in new and creative ways.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of those serendipitous connections. The more we're exposed to different ideas and perspectives, the more likely we are to make those unexpected leaps of exaptation.
It's like putting all those tools from our toolbox out on the table and seeing what happens when we start playing with them, trying different combinations, seeing what works. It really is like having this giant toolbox, right? I mean, we've got all these amazing tools at our disposal, but sometimes it feels like we're missing the instruction manual. But maybe that's the beauty of innovation, figuring out how to use those tools in new and unexpected ways.
Exactly. And, it's not just about the tools themselves, it's about the people who are using them.
Hmm.
We need to cultivate that sense of curiosity, that willingness to experiment, and that tolerance for error.
Yeah. All right. Let's bring it all back to the 9/11 Phoenix memo and that kind of chilling what if scenario. We talked about how the FBI's, closed system hindered the flow of information. But what if we kind of reimagine that scenario with all these new concepts in mind? How might things have unfolded differently?
Well, imagine if instead of those siloed departments, the FBI had fostered more of a culture of open communication and information sharing. Think of something like an internal social network where agents could, post their observations, connect with others who are working on similar cases, and maybe even crowdsource solutions.
So Agent Williams posts his Phoenix memo to this hunch network, tags it with keywords like, flight schools, terrorism, radical Islam, and weeks later those agents in Minnesota who are struggling to get a warrant to search Moussaoui's laptop, they come across this memo while they're browsing the network.
Suddenly, those two seemingly isolated hunches become connected. The pieces of the puzzle start falling into place. The agents in Minnesota now have the context they need to build a stronger case. They see that Moussaoui's behavior isn't just an isolated incident, but potentially part of a larger, more sinister pattern.
And they have the evidence they need to obtain that warrant, and who knows what they might have found on that laptop. It's mind-blowing to think that just a simple connection, a sharing of hunches, could have potentially changed the course of history.
It really drives home the point that innovation isn't always about those big eureka moments. It's often about those small incremental steps, those connections that we make along the way.
And it highlights the crucial role that technology can play in facilitating those connections. It makes you wonder what other kind of world-changing ideas are out there just waiting to be connected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, technology is just a tool. We still need people who are willing to think critically, to ask tough questions, and to challenge the status quo.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into innovation, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? What can we all do to become better innovators in our own lives and in our work?
Well, for me, it really boils down to a few key principles. First, cultivate your curiosity. Stay open to new ideas, even the ones that seem, a bit strange or unconventional at first second. Embrace serendipity. Create those opportunities for unexpected encounters, whether it's through reading or networking or simply taking a walk in nature.
And don't be afraid to fail view those setbacks as feedback, as opportunities to learn and grow.
Exactly. And finally, remember that innovation is a team sport. Connect with others, share your ideas, and build those networks where the sparks of brilliance can truly ignite.
This has been an incredible journey from those tiny carbon atoms to the vast networks of cities and ideas. We've really seen how innovation shapes our world. But here's a final thought for our listeners. What are some slow hunches that you're carrying around? What connections are you missing? And how can you create a more fertile environment for those hunches to connect? Remember, the next world-changing idea might be just a connection away.
Keep those minds open and those connections flowing. Until next time, happy innovating.